What is up, people? My name is Darren Lee and welcome back to Kickoff Sessions. On this video, I'm going to get into the detail about how you can move industry with no experience. Yes, that is with zero experience, about how you can transfer from one industry to the next. Before we get into the video, if you can subscribe down below, like, leave a comment, or even share it to your favorite social media platform, it really helps to grow the channel. So let's get straight into it. Number one thing you want to do when you want to move industry, and this was very, very prevalent in my scenario, was looking at an actual role matching. So unless you are able to go do a complicated master's, which I wasn't able to do, I didn't have the money or the funds or really the interest in going to do that. Instead, what I did was I wanted to model the role in the new industry that I wanted to go get. Now, how do you do this? So if you're in a certain industry, let's say it's in finance and you work as an analyst, if you want to move to a new industry, whether that could be consulting, technology, startups, or whatever, you want to find a very similar role to what you're doing right now. You can go to LinkedIn Jobs, you can go to Indeed, you can go to pretty much any job search platform and find that exact role matching. Why you want to do this is because often or not, the roles are highly transferable. I'll give you an example. If you are a project manager in the world of consulting and you wanted to move into finance, there's a lot of project management roles in that area as well. You just need to be able to decipher between what's relevant to your CV and what you can carry across. Now, it's important here to note that you don't have the actual experience within finance, as the example is, but you want to be able to transfer across. So you're looking at those roles matching. Again, I would look at sub platforms like LinkedIn like this, find the exact role, move across and see what is the exact alignment. That is your first step. That's your first step. From there on out, then I would really focus on the actual job specification itself and try to find the commonalities between your existing role and the new industry and what that has to do. So giving a good example of the project manager role, project manager will often have stakeholder skills, he'll be able to communicate well, he'll be able to deliver projects, for instance, but often in one industry, it may look completely alien to the other, but they are highly correlated. So if you're working in medicine, for instance, in a medical industry, and you wanted to move across to a new industry, you can find those common skills that are really the nuts and bolts of the actual role itself. This does not mean that you have to, learn more about the industry. This just means that you're bringing this across the table. And why that's important is because a lot of firms, especially nowadays, are trying to hire roles that are pretty unique. And with that, they're bringing people across with different experiences than in the past. So you don't necessarily need to have the master's in finance degree or whatever it may particularly be. You can carry across your own skills that were role dependent and actually job specification based. The next section around here is looking at the gap analysis of what you actually don't have particularly learned. Now, that's completely okay. If you are moving industry, you could be 2, 3, even more, 5 to 10 years experience. You may not have the necessary skills at the moment to move across. And it's not the fact that you have to go and learn them, but you do have to understand where your weak points are. That's something that I tried to do a lot when I moved industry, was take a look at the job specifications and let's look at some things that are very, very particular to the role. It could be regulation, it could be subject matter expertise, it could be stuff that you can only learn when you have a background in it or if you have a bit of experience actually in it at that point. You don't necessarily need to go off and learn everything, but I would just definitely note all of the important areas that you think you're going to need to learn or to develop as you go down the line. And that is mostly based on actual the subject itself. It doesn't necessarily have to be the industry. It doesn't have to necessarily be like technical skills. It can just be relating to the industry. Then from there, what's important is trying to fill that gap just on your own accord. You can do this without having to flood loads of money into this. And that's very important here. If we had the money, we'd go back to do a master's degree. If we had the time, we could potentially do something like that. But what I'd often recommend instead is find the big players in the industry. Find the people that provide valuable information that you can follow on a daily basis, weekly basis, that publish free content online. It could be YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, big one for myself, or pretty much any platform like that. If you can find those commonalities between them, follow these guys on a regular basis, you're going to learn so much just inherently just as you go through that actual moving along process. Now, I still recommend as well subscribing to some of the main media channels. So if my instance was the world of finance, I subscribe to the likes of CNBC, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times. I just wanted to get my foot in the door to learn things on an ongoing basis and to see what it is I really had to know for the particular role. And then once I learned that and once I was able to follow it, I kind of got into a cycle of, learning and developing, because I was trying to move across industry. I was looking at new roles. I was trying to find the new roles. And even though some of them were more apparent than others, what I was able to do was just constantly just pick up small nuggets of information from people online publicly. Now, what you can do as well is take it one step further from here. And what I would allocate generally is 1 hour a day, between 30 to 60 minutes a day, if you actually have the opportunity to really try figure out and learn a bit more about the industry. I used a lot of low-cost platforms like Coursera, which was fantastic. I used Investopedia to really identify some, terms, some terminology that I could learn. And for very low cost, it could be 30 quid a month or whatever, I was able to find these different areas that I could really brush up on. And the idea with this is that I was never a subject matter expert at the end of it. I was never really, really well experienced. But what I did have was just a basic working knowledge. So then I could go into my interview and focus very hard on what I did know, which was the role specification that I can bring across from my existing industry. And then what I will often say as well is I just lean into the stuff that I didn't particularly know and say, look, I'm working really hard on this. This is what I'm doing. I'm studying in my free time and I'm learning a little bit more about the industry. And what has happened then is when you get to that interview stage, when it gets to the execution, you don't necessarily need to know everything. And that's a big thing that I always try to get across when it gets to interviewing. You don't need to know all the answers. You just need to know your verticals really, really, really well, because often you wouldn't get to the interview stage unless you were somewhat qualified for the role. And now that you're in this mix of people, you can bring out your own characteristics, which is the areas that I touched on at the beginning that I'm very, very strong on. And everything else then can be learned. And that's what you're really putting in. So even though you don't have the industry experience at that time, people will take a bet on you because they will anticipate that you're going to get better, you're going to improve, you're going to put the time in because you're after getting to the stage already in your own industry. So these are a couple of tips that I really had. I thought it was very, very helpful for myself. It's something that a lot of people that are young want to move across and something that they want to implement. So just to recap, look at the role, look at the dream role that you want to find, look at the specification that you want to, really want to nail down, figure out the gaps in your work, and then really look to brush up in skills by free resources, the industry leaders, as well as actual resources that you can go find online that are courses and whatnot that are all low cost. I moved industry about over a year ago now, and I did it for less than €100, and I had very, very little experience at the beginning. And this is what I wanted to get across to people, that you don't need to know everything. It can be just small steps along the way, but when you put them pieces together, it works out great in the end. So if you like this video, I really appreciate if you subscribe down below. If you could also like it, leave a comment, let me know your thoughts. If you're struggling with something as well, let me know and we can do a video on it as well as we go through. Also, if you want to share this episode to social media as well, that would be hugely appreciative. So I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you for listening.